I've noticed in recent years a trend, and this trend is the disintegration of our capacity to engage in genuine discussion and argumentation. And this might be attributable to the internet at large, given the vast platform that it is, but also, I believe, the inception of things like Discord, and in still more recent times, the creation of YouTube Bloodsport. And when I speak of an inability to engage in discussion and argumentation, I am speaking of a general inability to not define terms and not agree on terms, and oftentimes, in fact, in most cases, terms will not be defined at all, and the consequence and result of this is that you have, in some situations, discussions that last hours where there is no synthesis of thought and no conclusion and no real argument being put forth, either because the terms of discussion and the categories contained within discussion were never defined, and the discussions are just about quote-unquote winning points with whichever side person A or B is on. And I've seen this in recent times accelerate to the point of absurdity. Two discussions come to mind of late, or in recent weeks, although they are by no means the only ones I could think of, but just to cite some anecdotal examples of this, a very recent discussion about progressives, and specifically about the relationship between modern 2018 current year progressives and so-called progressives of the early 20th century. You know, the ones that on occasion engaged in forced sterilization, had very restrictionist immigration policies vis-a-vis the 1924 Immigration Act in the United States, etc. And he was making all kinds of absurd claims about how the progressives of 2018 were in fact the same people, not identical people, obviously, as those people are likely dead, but the same people promoting these policies. And yet when you examine the policies of the early quote-unquote progressives, they are markedly different and seem to be stretching for completely different goals. And so I and some other colleagues quizzed him or asked him to offer some definitions, and he sort of danced around that and refused to go into any detail. He would not offer explanations, and the categories had really no refinement to them. And so we just went around for hours in circles talking about much to do about nothing. No one really bought his case, and his claims being false, I think, that is not supported by the evidence notwithstanding, the whole argument could have been made a lot better had he defined terms such as what is progressive, what are eugenics. He talked about the modern progressive, the progressives promoting eugenics, which is really absurd if you think about it, etc. He never defined any of this. And so I got tired of it, but this is not unique. In another instance I can think of fairly recently, there was a discussion about souls. Now, I think this is a silly discussion, to be honest. I'm talking about souls, but the idea of the soul as energy that floats free of the body. Of course, nowhere in the discussion, the initial discussion at least, did the gentleman proposing this idea, although he would have claimed he's merely open to the idea, define what he meant by energy. Now, there is a working definition of energy, and the basic definition of energy, of course, in physics is the capacity to do work. That would have been a lot more restrictive to his case had he defined it as such. In fact, he never defined energy, and so we were left to think of energy as just this thing that floats about. And the entire discussion really was a waste of time because he never defined the categories he was using. And I see this all the time. A hypothetical example, let's say if you wanted to talk about Roman history, well, early Roman Republic would be very different in terms of the details than the empire, or even the late Republic. Say, if you want to talk about the Roman Republic in 400 BC, which is approximately 100 years after its founding, versus 30 BC, which is a few years before it ends officially, 27 BC. And you were to conflate these things. Let's say you had two people, person A and B. Person A wants to discuss the late Roman Republic, and so does person B, and yet they don't have a common definition of temporal overlap there. You're going to run into a problem. I mean, maybe one person just doesn't know the dates at all. Maybe one person thinks that the founding of Rome is somehow the late Roman Republic. The point I'm making here is that in order to have a conversation about reasonably difficult topics, and in particular abstractions, you need to define the categories you're using, and you need to give details and give definitions. If you don't do this, you're just going to run around in a circle and waste time. Now, in internet Bloodsport, this doesn't matter. But in any kind of reasonable, rational attempt at argumentation and discussion, it does matter. It matters how you're defining terms. And the terms that you use matter as well. If you don't have a common base of knowledge, this can become, well, very difficult, needless to say. Sometimes there is that common base of knowledge, and therefore you can draw upon that, and the people who are involved in the conversation can draw upon this common knowledge, and there isn't very much confusion. These conversations tend to be more fluid. But if you don't have a basic working knowledge or basic working definitions of the things you're talking about, what does it mean? So I can throw out a term such as free market capitalism, but it's pretty meaningless if I don't define it. But if I go on to say I want to have a discussion with a bunch of people about free market capitalism, and I never define it, and I just assume that there is an abstract definition that is conformed to, that everyone agrees on, that's a problem. The same can be said of any historical phenomenon, and it certainly can be said about political terms such as progressivism, or very loaded terms such as eugenics. Eugenics at its base just means promoting a positive gene pool, but it obviously has other connotations, and we need to take that into account. There were forced sterilizations, for example, in the early 20th century in the United States, as well as in places like Sweden of the Sami people. And that was predicated on, you could say, progressive ideas of quote-unquote eugenics. How eugenic they ultimately were is and can be the subject of dispute. But the idea that progressives in 2018 are effectively promoting the same policies, when everything we look at seems to contradict that thesis, well, the only way you can get there, again, is if you don't define things. But now we're getting to the crux of the matter. In the year 2018, the current year of our Lord Jesus Christ, namely that people, inasmuch as they ever had the desire to engage in forthright discussion, have seemingly completely discarded that interest in favor of shouting festivals and winning points with their audiences. Now, that might be an effective means of getting money thrown at you in live stream discussions, and perhaps that is not to be disparaged, because we all need money to survive. But I think we're losing something in a broader sense when we don't strive for coherency and a general cohesion in the way we discuss things. And if things are not clear, then we can define them, and then we can talk about that. Now, it is possible, of course, that people have different definitions. One person's progressivism might be another person's republicanism, for all I know, in this specific case. And if you wish to ignore technical scientific definitions of energy, you could say energy is spirit matter, which is a completely meaningless term, but there you go. You can arrive at these impasses between people, but generally speaking, it is possible to define things and talk about issues within the context of categories and definitions. And that's all I'm basically trying to say here, that we would all benefit from being more precise in how we describe things, and if it's not clear, defining our arguments and offering concrete definitions of categories. Not much more to say on this, but you can probably tell by the tone of my voice, I'm a bit exasperated, because I've just been seeing this go on and on and on for years now, and I unfortunately have been sucked into discussions and arguments and debates where I ask the person what they mean by X, and I'm never given an answer. And what else can I do in such a situation other than to shrug my shoulders and move on? I don't expect the internet or human beings to change, to be honest, but I do think it would be good to return to certain basic principles of discussion. And it is something that has increasingly been in decline as far as I can tell. Everyone, thanks for watching, and I will catch you at a later date if I'm still alive. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.